My name is Gnome, and at 27, I thought I'd seen the worst exhaustion a human body could endure. But that night, after an 18-hour shift at the hospital, I realized there's a kind of tired that sinks deeper than muscles. It seeps into your bones, sits heavy behind your eyes, and lives where joy is supposed to be. I'd spent the entire day trying to keep people alive, cracked a rib doing chest compressions on a teenager, called time of death on 3 others, and somehow managed to bring 2 back. My scrubs were stiff with dried blood, and the smell of antiseptic had followed me into the car. All I wanted was a shower, food that didn't come from a vending machine, and a few hours of sleep before I had to do it all again in the morning. That was it, my entire wish list. But when I parked in the driveway and tried to unlock the door, my key wouldn't turn. At first, I thought I was too tired to line it up properly. I jiggled it, twisted it harder, even pulled it out to double-check the grooves. Then the door swung open, and there she was, Lisa, my stepmother. She stood in yoga pants and a wine-stained tank top, her phone in one hand and disdain in her eyes. "Oh," she said like she'd forgotten I existed. "You're back early." I blinked at her, confused. Behind her on the couch was my stepsister Kayla, wearing my hoodie, scrolling through TikTok while her useless boyfriend dug into a bag of chips I'd bought. "The key doesn't work," I said slowly. Lisa smirked, sipping from her glass. "We changed the locks. Rent's gone up. You want to stay here, you'll have to pay $36,000 in back rent and utilities. Your sister needs a vacation. You're a doctor. You can't afford it." She said it like she was offering me a favor. For a second, I just stood there, my duffel bag sliding slightly from my shoulder, shoes sticking to the mat. My brain tried to process the absurdity of it. "Did Dad approve this?" I finally asked. Her expression sharpened into something smug. "Your father's overseas, remember? Which means this house is mine when he's gone. I make the rules." I glanced past her into the living room. My textbooks were still stacked by the wall. My name was still on the utility bills I'd paid last month. I felt something in me go quiet, heavy still. "Understood," I said. That was all. Then I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't slam the door, didn't yell or beg. I just drove away into the night, the ache in my chest louder than the engine. I ended up sleeping in the on-call room at the hospital, curled up on a thin mattress that smelled like bleach, while I lay there staring at the ceiling. I imagined them inside that house, Lisa, with her smug smile. Kayla bragging on social media about how they'd finally kicked me out. Maybe they toasted with cheap wine, proud of themselves. What they didn't know was that I'd been waiting for this moment for years. The next morning, I drove back before sunrise. I slipped a sealed envelope under the door, right on the welcome mat, and parked down the street. I waited. At exactly 9 in the morning, right on schedule. Lisa opened the door wearing fuzzy slippers and holding her #1 mom mug. She spotted the envelope, bent down, opened it, and screamed. Not just a startled sound, but a full, gut-deep, blood-curdling scream that made dogs bark and neighbors peek through curtains. I didn't move. I just watched from my car as her face went pale, then red, then something between rage and panic. She shouted for Kayla, who stumbled out in my hoodie, hair messy, face confused. She read the letter and her mouth dropped open. They both started shouting, hands flailing, disbelief written all over them. That scream, the one that carried through the neighborhood, was the sound of losing control, of realizing they had messed with the wrong person. But to understand that moment, you'd have to understand how we got there. Before Lisa, the house had felt like safety. When I was a kid, it was where I came after soccer practice, where I did homework while Dad nodded off reading medical journals beside me. The fridge always had orange Gatorade. The air always smelled like cinnamon. My mom made the place feel alive, warm throws, soft lamps, laughter that filled the corners. Then she died. I was 12 when the car accident happened. She'd been picking up decorations for my birthday when another driver ran a red light. One moment I was waiting for cake. The next, my entire world split in half. Dad didn't cry at the funeral, but his hand on my shoulder was so tight it left a mark. For a while, it was just the two of us, two broken people trying to stay afloat. Then came Lisa, I was 15 when he married her. She was the kind of woman who introduced herself with a fake smile and a manicure that matched her lipstick. She had a daughter my age, Kayla, who treated rules like suggestions and thought being rude was a personality. Dad said Lisa would help bring light back into the house. Instead, she turned it cold. She removed every trace of my mother, her candles, her photos, her scent. When I asked once if I could keep one of Mom's framed pictures in my room, Lisa looked at me and said, "Don't you think it's time to move on?" But what she meant was, "Don't you think it's time I erased her completely?" So I learned silence. I buried myself in school, worked double shifts, and avoided home as much as possible. I didn't fight. I didn't complain. I just waited. Over the years, Lisa and Kayla grew bolder. They treated the house like their kingdom while I became a guest in the home my father bought. When I started med school, I sent money for bills, fixed things that broke, paid for groceries without being asked. They never thanked me. But I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it to keep the peace. I thought maybe if I gave enough, they'd leave me alone. Instead, they wanted more. The moment I started earning a real paycheck, Lisa began dropping comments about how expensive it is to raise girls and how I'd lived there rent-free. Then came the bold demand, the $36,000 ransom for a place I already helped maintain, and when I refused, they changed the locks. That was their final mistake. Because what Lisa didn't know, what she never cared to ask, was that the house wasn't hers to claim. My father had bought it long before her, and years ago, quietly, he'd signed it over to me. When I was 21, my dad had quietly transferred ownership of the house to me through a trust. He never told Lisa. He just said, "I want you to be protected no matter what happens." I didn't fully understand what he meant back then, but I do now. For years, I'd kept that document buried in a drawer untouched because I didn't want to be petty or cruel. I thought maybe, just maybe, Lisa would mellow out and start acting like a decent human being. I kept paying bills, doing repairs, buying groceries, even when I barely made enough to cover my own expenses during residency. I didn't want conflict, I just wanted peace. But peace was something Lisa never believed in. When my father got deployed overseas again for another contract, she saw it as an opportunity to tighten her grip on everything he'd built. The moment he left, she treated me like an outsider. Every conversation came with a tone. Every meal became a reminder that I was an inconvenience. Every favor she granted came with a price tag. Then Kayla brought home her boyfriend, some jobless guy covered in tattoos, who claimed he was a musician but never once left the couch. He ate our food, used my Wi-Fi, and once had the audacity to yell at me for making too much noise while studying for my board exams. When I confronted Lisa, she waved it off. "He's family," she said. Funny, because I couldn't remember the last time she called me that. By the time I finished med school, I had stopped trying to earn her approval. But I still helped out because it was easier than fighting. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe things would stay calm. But money changes people, especially people who feel entitled to yours. When my first real paycheck came in, Lisa suddenly turned sweet. She asked about my shifts, brought me coffee, even smiled sometimes. I should have known it was bait. A few weeks later, she started dropping hints. "Kayla's never had a real vacation. You know," she said one evening, swirling her wine. "She's been under so much stress." I didn't respond. Then came another comment. "You've done so well for yourself, honey. Maybe it's time you started contributing more to the household." I reminded her that I already paid half the bills more. Actually, but she laughed it off like I was being dramatic. A few days later, while I was reheating leftovers, she finally said it straight. "You should pay back rent for all those years you lived here," she said casually, like she was asking me to pass the salt. Kayla chimed in from the couch. "It's only fair. You're a doctor now." I remember standing there, staring at the lasagna spinning in the microwave, trying to process the absurdity of being financially mugged in my own home. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just turned off the microwave, grabbed my plate, and went upstairs. 2 days later, I came home from my shift to find my key didn't work. That was when I realized Lisa wasn't bluffing. She'd actually changed the locks. That night, while they probably congratulated themselves for taking a stand, I was sitting in the hospital call room, scrolling through my files until I found the one labeled trust deed. The next morning, I printed 2 copies of the deed, attached an eviction notice, and sealed it in an envelope. I didn't need revenge. I just needed closure. When Lisa opened that letter, I imagine her heart stopped for a moment. Because inside was the one thing she could never manipulate: proof. Proof that the house she'd spent years trying to control never belonged to her. Proof that I wasn't some powerless little girl she could push around anymore. And when I watched her scream on that porch, I didn't feel satisfaction or glee. I just felt done with pretending, done with trying, done with giving people the benefit of the doubt when they'd only ever used it to hurt me. Later that day, my phone started buzzing calls from Lisa, from Kayla, from numbers I didn't even recognize. I ignored them all. Then came the voicemails. "You think this is funny?" Lisa's voice was sharp, frantic. "You forged this, didn't you? This is illegal, Gnome. You'll go to jail for this." Then Kayla's voice chimed in, tearful and indignant. "You're seriously kicking us out. What's wrong with you? We're family." I didn't answer because we weren't family, not in any way that mattered. That night, I drove back to the hospital and collapsed into another shift. My coworkers thought I looked distracted, but I just told them I was tired. How could I explain that the people I grew up with were now strangers trying to extort me for 36 grand? The irony was I could have easily paid that money, but that wasn't the point. It was never about the amount. It was about what they thought they could take from me just because I didn't fight back before. Over the next few days, the situation escalated. Lisa switched from phone calls to social media. First came the Facebook post. "It's a sad day when the ones you raised turn their backs on you. Some people forget who fed them." She added a crying emoji and a photo of our front porch, dramatically captioned with "Betrayal hurts most when it comes from home." Within hours, her friends flooded the comments with sympathy. "You're such a good mom," one wrote. "Stay strong," said another. Kayla wasn't far behind. She posted a TikTok with a sad filter in the caption, "POV. Your sister evicts you because you asked her to pay rent once." It got thousands of views, of course. People love drama they don't understand. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't need to. Instead, I started collecting screenshots. Every post, every comment, every lie. I labeled the folder proof. Because if Lisa wanted to play dirty, I could play smart. When she finally called again, I answered, "So you're really doing this?" She hissed. "Yes," I said simply. "You'll regret it. This house was a gift to this family." "No," I said calmly. "It was a gift to me," she sputtered, shouting something about morality, betrayal, and "how could you do this to us after everything we gave you?" I didn't even try to argue. I just said, "Check the deed," and hung up. That night, my dad called. His voice was quieter than I remembered, softer but steady. "I heard what's happening," he said. "You knew?" I asked. "Not everything, but I suspected. Lisa's been telling people things that didn't sit right. I figured she'd eventually push you too far." I told him about the eviction, the posts, the threats. He sighed. "Send me the documents," he said. "I'll take care of it." That was my dad, always calm, always precise. But this time, there was something different in his tone. He wasn't defending her anymore. He was defending me. I didn't know what that meant yet, but soon I would. The next morning, I sent my dad scanned copies of everything: the trust deed, the eviction notice, even screenshots of Lisa's posts. Within an hour, he called me back. "You did everything right," he said. His voice had that mix of disappointment and resolve I hadn't heard since I was a kid. "I'll be flying back next week. Don't communicate with them until I get there." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was on my side. I hadn't realized how exhausting it was to always be alone in a house full of people until now. Lisa didn't stop, of course. If anything, she doubled down. She told the neighbors I was having a mental breakdown, that I'd tricked my dad into signing the papers years ago. She even tried to claim that the trust was void because he wasn't in his right mind when he made it. It would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. Kayla, meanwhile, kept posting passive-aggressive quotes online about fake people who forget their roots and karma always coming around. My friends started texting me screenshots, asking, "Is this about you?" I just laughed it off. But inside, it hurt. Not because of what they said, but because they believed their own lies. A week later, I drove to the house to pick up the rest of my things. I didn't tell them I was coming. I just wanted my dad's old photo albums, some books, and a few keepsakes. When I pulled up, Lisa's car was gone. I let myself in using the spare key from the backyard, the same one I'd hidden there years ago in case of emergencies. The house smelled the same. Coffee, old carpet, faint perfume. For a moment, I almost felt homesick. Then I looked at the wall where Dad's portrait used to hang. It was gone. I checked the living room shelves, his navy medals, the antique clock, all missing. The only things left were broken frames and a half-empty wine glass on the table. They'd started stripping the house before they were even officially out. I grabbed what little was left of my things and loaded the car. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a piece of paper pinned to the fridge. It was a handwritten note. "Enjoy your empty house," it read in Lisa's loopy handwriting. "You'll always be alone here." I stared at it for a long moment before crumpling it in my hand. Maybe she was right. But at least now I'd be alone on my own terms. When Dad arrived a few days later, I met him at the airport. He looked older, more tired, but his eyes softened when he saw me. "You've handled this better than most adults would," he said. We drove in silence for a while until he asked to see the house. When we pulled up, he didn't say a word, just walked around, inspecting every room, every empty shelf. Finally, he stood in the kitchen, took a deep breath, and said, "They're not coming back." He wasn't angry, just resolved. "I'm changing the locks," he added. Again. Over the next few days, he handled everything methodically, calling lawyers, securing the property, filing restraining notices. I didn't ask for details, but I knew he wasn't leaving any loose ends this time. Then one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun go down, Kay said quietly, "You know, I gave Lisa every chance to change. But some people see kindness as weakness." I nodded. He turned to me. "You inherited that from me. The kindness part. But there's something you need to learn. Know my kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction." Those words stuck with me. For the first time in my life, I realized he wasn't just talking about Lisa, he was talking about me. A few weeks passed before I heard from Kayla again. This time, it wasn't a call or a post-it, was a text. "We're leaving town," it read. "You got what you wanted. Hope you're happy." I stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Relief? Guilt? Maybe both. I typed a response but deleted it. There was nothing left to say. Dad stayed for a few more weeks, helping me fix the house, new paint, new furniture, new locks. Slowly, it began to feel like mine. But the first night I stayed there alone, I couldn't sleep. The silence was too heavy. Every creak sounded like a memory. Every shadow reminded me of an argument. So I turned on the lights, sat in the living room, and read through some of Dad's old letters. In one of them, he'd written, "If you ever feel like the world is trying to shrink you, remember you come from people who survive storms." I smiled. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. A few months later, I decided to throw a small gathering at the house, not a party. It's dinner with close friends and coworkers. We cooked, laughed, and played music. It was the kind of night that reminded me what home was supposed to feel like. One of my friends looked around and said, "You've got a beautiful place, Noam." I smiled. It took a while to earn it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't just earned the house side, earned my peace. Sometimes losing people isn't a tragedy. It's the universe clearing space for something better. That realization hit me harder than anything else. Because after all the noise, the manipulation, and the guilt, silence finally felt like freedom. But that freedom came at a cost. Cost I didn't fully understand until the day Lisa came back. It was late afternoon when I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, there she was, same smug face, but something in her eyes had changed. She looked smaller, somehow weaker. "Can we talk?" she asked. My stomach tightened. "About what?" I asked flatly. "About everything," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there blocking the doorway, waiting. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad," she began. "I was angry. I thought you were trying to take everything from me." "And what exactly did I take?" I asked quietly. "This house. Dad gave it to me years ago. You just pretended it wasn't true." She looked away, tears gathering in her eyes. "I lost everything," she whispered. "Kayla won't talk to me anymore. Her boyfriend left. I've been staying with a friend. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the years of manipulation. The humiliation, the betrayal. "Lisa," I said calmly, "you didn't lose everything. You threw it away." Her lips trembled. "Please, Noam, I have nowhere else to go." I took a deep breath and stared at the woman who'd once been my mother. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I can't help you." And I closed the door. I stood there, frozen, staring at the closed door. For a moment, I could hear her soft sobs from the other side, fading slowly as she walked away. My hands were shaking, and not from anger this time, but from the weight of what I had just done. I wasn't heartless, but I couldn't let her back in. Not after everything. I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. The kind that feels like you're trying to steady a storm inside you. I thought about the little girl who once believed her stepmother's approval was worth earning, who used to clean her room spotless just so Lisa might smile at her. That girl would have opened the door, but I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd spent years trying to buy peace with silence, hoping good behavior could fix bad people. Now I finally understood, never could. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lisa's face broken and desperate. I tried to tell myself I did the right thing, that I owed her nothing. But guilt has a strange way of whispering louder than truth. So around midnight, I got in my car and drove aimlessly just to clear my head. I ended up at the old pier near the lake, the one Dad used to take me to when I was a kid. The water was still reflecting the moonlight like glass. I sat there for hours, listening to the gentle hum of the night, until my phone buzzed. It was a text from Dad. Heard from Lisa. It read, "You did what you had to. Proud of you." I exhaled, my chest finally loosening a little. Somehow, those 6 words were enough to remind me that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. When I drove home at dawn, the house felt different. Quieter, yes, but also lighter. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and watched the first rays of sunlight spill across the floor. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. Over the next few months, life began to find its rhythm again. I worked long shifts, spent weekends with friends, and even started volunteering at a free clinic downtown. The house, once filled with tension and noise, became a sanctuary. I planted flowers in the front yard, bright ones, the kind Dad always liked. Every morning before work, I'd water them and feel a strange sense of peace, knowing they were mine. That everything here was finally built on something real. One afternoon, while sorting through an old box of Dad's things, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me. His handwriting was neat, deliberate, like always. My heart skipped. I sat down and opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter. "Noam," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm not around to explain things myself. I wanted you to have the house, not as a prize or inheritance, but as protection. I knew Lisa's bitterness would grow over time, and I needed you to have a place that could never be taken from you. Family isn't about shared blood or last names. It's about who protects your peace. Don't ever let guilt trick you into giving that away. I'm proud of you, always." My eyes blurred as I finished reading. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. He had known. All those years, he'd seen what I tried to hide, and he'd quietly made sure I'd be safe long after he was gone. I realized then that this house wasn't just a property, it was a promise. A promise that I could start over, that I could build something new from the ashes of what used to be. A few weeks later, I decided to sell it. Not because I couldn't bear the memories, but because I finally could. Holding on to it no longer felt necessary. The real inheritance wasn't the building, it was the lesson. When the papers were finalized, I drove by one last time. The garden was blooming, the walls freshly painted, and for the first time it looked like a home again. I whispered a quiet goodbye and drove away without looking back. Months later, I rented a small apartment in the city, simple, cozy, filled with sunlight. My coworkers became like family. On weekends, I hosted dinners, something I never thought I'd enjoy again. Sometimes I'd catch myself glancing at the empty chair by the window and think of Dad. Other times, I'd see a woman at the grocery store who looked a bit like Lisa and feel that familiar twist in my chest. But it would fade quickly, because I knew now letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing peace over pain. One evening, I came home after a long shift and found a letter slipped under my door. It was unmarked, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Lisa's. My stomach sank. I hesitated, then opened it. The note was short. I'm leaving the state. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I hurt you until it was too late. I hope you find happiness. You deserve it. I sat down, staring at the words, unsure how to feel. There was no manipulation, no guilt, just raw honesty. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. But for the first time, it didn't matter. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer knot as a keepsake. But as a reminder that even the worst people can sometimes find clarity when the noise stops. That night, I lit a candle, sat by the window, and whispered, I forgive you. The air felt different, lighter somehow, as if a final knot had finally loosened inside me. I didn't need closure from her anymore. I'd given it to myself. And as the flame flickered gently against the glass, I realized something profound. Sometimes revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to destroy. In the end, I didn't just win back a house. I won back my peace, my dignity, and the quiet strength my father had always believed I carried. That night, as I turned off the light and closed my eyes, I didn't dream of the past. I dreamed of tomorrow, and for once, it felt bright,